Welcome to your daily episode of the Qasim Rashid Show. Today, we're discussing Viola Fletcher, who was among the last known living survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. She has died at the age of 111. Be sure to hit subscribe and share so we can continue to create this content. Last summer, I had the opportunity to visit the location of Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. See, I did not learn of the Tulsa Race Massacre until I was in law school, a fully grown adult. It just was not taught in schools when I was growing up. And today, as Project 2025 increases its death grip on public education, mentions of white supremacist terrorism against black and brown people, they continue to face erasure from the history books. In the face of such oppression in this country, one person who defied these odds and refused to remain silent was Viola Fletcher, also known as Mother Fletcher. Born in Comanche, Oklahoma on May 10th, 1914, she died just recently on November 24th, 2025, also in Comanche, Oklahoma. Miss Fletcher was the oldest known living survivor of the Tulsa Race Massacre. She fought valiantly throughout her life, facing horrific opposition from city and state authorities in her attempts to bring truth, light, and justice to the atrocities she suffered. She faced immense opposition and had no help from the federal government. In fact, it wasn't until January 10th, 2025, that the federal government finally published a report documenting the atrocities that took place at the Tulsa Race Massacre. As you listen to this detailed review of what she lived through in one of the worst incidents of mass racial violence in American history and the legacy that she leaves behind, think about the disinformation and violence that was used back then to spread hate and racial violence, and think about how that same hate and misinformation is being used today by corporate media. This should serve as a reminder of the work that remains before us and the obligation that each of us have to play our parts in righting these systemic wrongs. And look, no one article or podcast is going to do justice to the brilliant and inspiring life of Mother Fletcher, but I feel compelled to share what I can. For starters, there's an excellent piece on the Black Wall Street website that details her life. I'm going to read just an excerpt of it to you. In 1932, at the age of 18, Mother Fletcher married Robert Fletcher and moved to California in search of better opportunities. The Great Depression had gripped the nation, and many families struggled to make ends meet. Viola and Robert found work in the burgeoning shipyard industry during World War II, contributing to the war effort. Viola worked as an assistant welder, a physically demanding job that underscored her determination and resilience. After the war, the Fletchers returned to Oklahoma to raise their 3 children. Viola took on work cleaning houses, demonstrating an enduring work ethic that would see her employed well into her 80s. Her life after the massacre was marked by a quiet strength as she focused on providing for her family and instilling in her children the values of hard work and determination. Despite the challenges of systemic racism and the socioeconomic fallout of the massacre, Viola Fletcher remained a pillar of strength for her family and for her community. Her life, however, was not solely defined by personal struggles. She became a beacon of hope and a voice of justice for survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre and their descendants. End quote. Here's what they don't teach about the Tulsa Race Massacre. Did you know that the first time terrorists used planes to attack Americans wasn't on 9/11? It wasn't at Pearl Harbor. It was during the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, when white supremacists flew, quote, a dozen planes to drop turpentine or nitroglycerin bombs and men shot them from planes, end quote. The Tulsa Race Massacre took place in 1921, more than 100 years ago. It stands as one of the most devastating instances of racial terror and violence in this country, and also one of the most underreported and underrecognized. Even now, more than a century later, the Tulsa Race Massacre has resulted in 0 consequences for the culprits who ignited that massacre. Sadly, this lack of accountability for racial violence has been the norm for the entirety of American history. It is no wonder today that every intelligence agency still points to white supremacy terrorism as the single greatest terror threat to American national security. Indeed, it is truly a contemporary disgrace that just recently, in June of 2023, an Oklahoma judge dismissed with prejudice a lawsuit seeking accountability for the Tulsa Race Massacre. What happened that day? Well, the Tulsa Race Massacre murdered as many as 300 black Americans, destroyed 35 black-owned city blocks, hospitalized up to 800 black Americans, interned more than 8,000 black people in homeless shelters, and displaced more than 10,000 black people from their homes. Yet not a single culprit was brought to justice. No reparations or restitution was ever paid. And the Oklahoma Supreme Court horrifyingly rejected all civil suits and protected all insurance companies from having to pay out claims. In the final years of her life, Viola Fletcher refused to give up on accountability. She testified before Congress, declaring, "I will never forget the violence of the mob when we left our home. I still see black men being shot, black bodies lying in the street. I still smell smoke and see fire. I still see black businesses being burned. I still hear airplanes flying overhead. I hear the screams. I have lived through the massacre every day. Our country may forget this history, but I cannot." End quote. Malcolm X famously remarked, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. After the massacre, local and national media did exactly that immediately, whitewashing the attack and demonizing black people. Despite the estimated 300 black Americans killed, the Tulsa World newspaper astoundingly led with this headline: "Two whites dead in race riot." And quote, "Many more whites are shot," completely neglecting the mass destruction of black people and black livelihoods. Likewise, in an early version of the All Lives Matter mantra, the Los Angeles Express and the San Diego Union ran headlines completely erasing the targeted attacks on black Americans, instead only speaking about the estimated number of those killed, saying, quote, 175 killed, many wounded, city ablaze in race war. No mention of who started the war, no mention that the black Americans were the victims of that war. And not to be outdone, the New York Times made it seem like an equal number of white and black Americans were killed in the massacre. In reality, fewer than 10 white Americans died. Meanwhile, the headline read, 85 whites and Negroes die in Tulsa riots, as 3,000 armed men battle in streets, 30 blocks burned, military rule in city. As an ongoing reminder of the injustice committed during this massacre, Republicans insist on whitewashing this history and censoring study of atrocities like the Tulsa Race Massacre. How could black Americans, let alone the Tulsa community, ever heal or believe in their safety and value in this country when basic repair and justice remains unfound? Be sure to hit subscribe and share so we can continue to create this content. In the words of Miss Viola Fletcher herself, quote, "We were made to feel that our struggles were unworthy of justice, that we were less valued than whites, that we weren't fully American. We were shown that in the United States, not all men were equal under the law. We were shown that when black voices call out for justice, no one cared." End quote. Here's the bottom line. America cannot fulfill its promise of equal justice for all without meaningful accountability for those who violate that equal justice. Acknowledgement, reparations for the victims and their families, and an apology for Tulsa would be the basic, necessary steps towards justice. To date, the United States has delivered none of the above. Ms. Fletcher fought her whole life for an acknowledgement and justice for survivors like her. She said, "I believe we must acknowledge America's sins. It's the least we can do." True reform, therefore, will require a complete reimagining of public safety to counter the systemic violence against black, indigenous, and people of color. We cannot afford another century of apathy. If we are sincere about accountability for historical atrocities like the Tulsa Race Massacre, we must also be committed to meaningfully curb the tide of systemic racism, violence, and end white supremacy, and build a more perfect union that truly offers equal justice for all. And this is not ancient history. Consider that Miss Viola Fletcher was born only 1 year after Harriet Tubman died, who herself was 4 years old when Thomas Jefferson died. That is how stark today's connection is to the founding of this country. This isn't ancient history. This is contemporary reality. And this is why it is all the more critical that we act quickly to ensure justice for Tulsa and the dozens of other anti-black massacres that have gone unpunished throughout American history. Viola Fletcher's 111 years on this earth, without getting justice for the horrific violence and terrorism she faced, is a living indictment of America's refusal to confront its own violence. She carried in her memory and in her testimony the truth of Tulsa, what was taken, what was destroyed, and what this nation still refuses to reconcile. Miss Fletcher was not just a survivor. She was a historian, a witness, and a moral compass who spent a century demanding that this country tell the truth about itself. And now she passes the torch. Her passing is not an end to the Tulsa story. It is a reminder that we now inherit her fight. We owe it to her courage, to her persistence, to her unwavering clarity, to ensure Tulsa is neither forgotten nor sanitized. Justice, sadly, did not arrive in her lifetime, but it must arrive in ours.